Dress and appearance for women in an interview. Your footwear should have decent heel. Avoid casual footwear as it does not give a good impression of yourself in front of the panel. As I earlier said, it's expected of a lady to carry everything with poise. Clothes should fit well, but it shouldn't be tight. The length should be decent. You could pick up the colors that work for you. Muted colors can be chosen, one like blue and black. Generally, longer sleeves are recommended to maintain a more business-like appearance. Avoid jewelry. Makeup should be simple. The amount of jewelry should be minimized. Apply moisturizer and thin liner with light color lipstick only. Avoid opening your hair as it is not considered to be formal in an interview. Avoid complicated hairstyle. You can preferably go ahead with a ponytail or a bun or probably an updo. Jeans is an outfit which is generally not considered to be worn in an interview, but you can definitely combine it with a white shirt and it can be worn as it gives a formal look in the interview. Towards the end, you can any day pick up the ethnic Indian wear, a salwar kameez or a sari to be worn in an interview. Dress and appearance for men in interview. Prefer black or brown shoes. If possible, wear a suit to the interview or a nice trouser or shirt. For presentation in an interview, clothes that are checkered or brightly colored or that which will not reflect on well with your image. Depending upon the level of formality, you may wish to button the jacket or unbutton it, or probably you can take off the coat altogether. Your shirt should fit well and color should not be too bright. Tie can be used to complement the color of the shirt and also your eye and the face color. Avoid wearing informal clothes for interview. Hair frames the face and therefore it should be properly combed. Your facial hairs should be properly trimmed. Avoid ties with elaborate patterns or too many colors. A wedding ring or watch is generally the only jewelry that should be worn. Hair should be well groomed and shoes must be properly polished. We all have come across the time when we have faced an interview, but there's another important aspect to it, the time before the interview, when we are waiting outside for our turn to come. It's very important for us to maintain the demeanor right from the time when we are waiting outside for our turn. You must sit straight and look confident while you are waiting. You should not have a fidgeting body language. Instead of getting yourself distracted, focus on the questions that you might be asked inside. Your body language should not project that you are not interested to be there, interested in the meeting. To avoid distraction, you can focus on the CV and think of the questions that might be asked inside. Open the door gently while you enter the room. After you get the response from the panel, let yourself in. Body language in interview. Walk in confidently. Greet the interviewer. Make eye contact. You can seek their permission and then sit. Smile. Sit up straight and avoid slouching. Your body language should be proper while you're sitting in front of the panel. Legs should be even on the floor. Hands should be properly placed on the laps. Once you're in the process of communication, you must start interacting with the panel. Once you get the question, take your time to answer back. Make eye contact. Show gestures. And while you are at the mid of the interview, you can lean forward a bit as it shows that you are interested. Be receptive enough to take the inputs from the panel and give your best. While you are done with the interview, stand up, say thank you and walk out confidently. Put the chair back and leave the room in a proper manner. You must not rush inside the room without even asking for their permission to enter. Inappropriate body language in interview. You must not directly enter the room and take your seat without even seeking permission from the panel. You haven't even greeted them, and that leaves a very bad impression about you on the panel. You must not have a body language in which you are leaning forward and fidgeting. Your legs should not be placed on each other. You must have eye contact. Your body must not project an informal behavior. You must focus on the questions asked by the panel, and your response should involve eye contact, making gestures. You must not directly leave without even saying thank you to them.
Hello, good day to everybody. What we're going to display here is an unmoderated group discussion. The topic for the group discussion is going to be heavy taxation on automation. The format we shall follow is about a minute of preparation, after which we shall all make opening remarks. Post opening remarks, we shall open the floor to discussion amongst all four candidates. After discussions over, we shall end this with some closing remarks from each of the candidates. So we have about a minute to think. I would just like to repeat the motion again. It's about heavy taxation on automation. I'd now like to invite all of the candidates to make opening remarks.
Hello, my name is Partha. I'll be taking the position of in favoring heavy taxation of automation, as I believe that the wealth inequality it generates is highly problematic in the society today.
Hello, my name is Ankit. My position on this group discussion is going to be in opposition to the motion of heavily taxing automation, primarily because I believe that the benefits that automation will have to society are going to be significantly greater than any potential harms, and the ability to overcome those harms is something that we can discuss forward during the discussion.
Hi, my name is Manav. I also believe that it's a good idea to tax automation. I believe just the pace at which automation is currently displacing manual labor and how industry specific this displacement is a major concern that pushes me towards the pro side of this.
Hi, my name is Rohan, and I'm against heavy taxation on robots because I feel that the kind of jobs that automation is mainly taking up are jobs that need to be replaced and are jobs that cannot be performed by humans anymore.
Right. I think we can now open this floor up for discussion.
So, on the basis of understanding why taxation of automation is good or bad, we have to first understand why automation is good or bad, because that's a very closely interlinked debate, right? So I agree to a large extent with what Rohan also said. I think that automation in itself removes a lot of jobs that are dangerous, often create a lot of accidents in workplaces, and are also problematic with respect to like safety standards, health standards, and things like that. I think from perspective of automation existing, by virtue of the fact that robots don't have health and safety standards because they are not animate objects, the ability for these robots to save lives is a very important aspect, right? But I think more than just saving lives, I think automation in terms of general ability to reduce prices of commodities by virtue of the efficiency that they have, simply because by virtue of automation being so efficient as computerized systems, the ability to reduce wastage of resources and the ability to efficiently allocate resources is much better in automation, simply means that the benefits that percolate from automation are going to be better, especially as automation progresses.
I just think a lot of this is moot. At the point at which this debate is about heavy taxation on automation and not about banning automation altogether, we think companies that see like value in saving resources or in like not spending on life insurance or on additional like safety mechanisms of laborers, which they have to by safety regulations in the mining industry, for example, they're going to install these automation robots anyway. The question is this, that when the jobs are being lost at a pace as quick as like 10,000 a day, 20,000 a day, as the state or as this like the people who are supposed to take care of these laborers, how do you take care of them? So, my reason is that there is an overburdened state that cannot take care of everyone who is currently unemployed.
So I think there are problems that I see with your argument, right? So the first idea is that automation will occur irrespective of whether it's taxed or not, right? First, I think the idea that it's heavy taxation means that the intention is precisely to stall the uptick of automation within industries. Second, I think the idea that jobs are being lost is important, right? I think that jobs being lost is a consideration when automation does exist. But A, these jobs are inherently not particularly good jobs, they're either repetitive or dangerous. But B, the fact that societies need to evolve from investing in like repetitive manufacturing jobs and instead invest in education so that like higher quality jobs can be created in significantly greater numbers, or jobs that specifically require human interaction, such as say caregiving for like medical patients, or like simple entrepreneurship and usage of human intellect will simply increase. And more importantly, the fact that society today focuses so much on a stable job as opposed to like allowing you to do what you really want is something that is a problem today, which I think automation will solve in the future. Therefore, I think those points, while certainly valid in a limited context, don't really stand up to scrutiny, especially with respect to the alternatives that automation can form with respect to how society can evolve.
I disagree with that position. Firstly, as far as automation is concerned, I don't think heavy taxation necessarily entails like the stopping of automation or the replacement of labor with robots in the first place. I think we can maintain an equilibrium where there is some amount of profitability for the industries to go ahead and automate their processes while ensuring that the benefits they accrue from this automation are distributed to the public, right? Because ultimately the real loser here is the person who's losing his job. And while it may be possible that this person could have an alternative job, it is not by principle. We could well envision a scenario where robots could replace most of the working population's occupations, right? So in that scenario, I think that it's a little idealistic to assume that a job will be created for every time we replace a particular job with a robot, and seeing as the profits are going to rise anyway with automation, I am in favor of heavy taxation on automation.
So, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, again, the argument that automation would like completely take over jobs across all industries is a little far-fetched, like we've already discussed, right? We believe that there are still a lot of jobs that require human intellect and human cognitive abilities that cannot be replaced by robots, right? And having said that, we believe that the primary industries that will be affected are, like we already discussed, not very safe for humans to be working in any ways, right? So that is why, on that front, we believe automation is useful, since it is doing jobs for you that that are dangerous for humans to perform, and also it is also a leap towards like allowing companies to invest in technologies and invest and sort of grow and develop and make more profit.
I just think it's a lie. I think it is not true that the only jobs automation is currently taking up are jobs that are unsafe for humans. Simple jobs like those of delivery of packets, something like the Amazon idea of having drones deliver your like delivery packages to your house, etc. Or simple assembly lines where all you have to do is cork like the cover or the cap of a bottle onto a bottle itself, are jobs that are taken up by people who are largely unskilled. These are people with little to no education, and these are people with no alternatives. To meaningfully engage in this debate, I request my peers to tell me who is going to take care of these people, because these are people who will not get another job or getting them education is something that is very, very expensive. It is a very long process. So it will take you 10 years to educate them, for example. How do they get jobs in that case?
So I think there are 3 points that have come up that I think need to be tackled importantly, right? First, with the idea of some amount of profitability, I think Partha talked about, right? I think it's a problem that governments start defining exactly what extent to which companies or corporations can be profitable, which is effectively what they're doing, right? Second, and this is very important in this discussion, I think the idea of profits being trickled down, for example, to benefits for the lower classes of the people who are economically worse off, is under the assumption that heavy taxation of robots is the only way by which to do this, right? When you have alternative systems such as the universal basic income, which happens with a complete elimination of existing social welfare schemes, which happen to be very inefficient and also poorly targeted, and instead simply using that as a direct lump sum payment to individuals monthly, means that to a large extent there are significant alternative possibilities to ensure that such economic problems do not occur in the first place, right? Lastly, yes, we agree that to a large extent even things like clerical jobs or design jobs are also up for this, right? But that's again one aspect of it, right? So when you look at multiple aspects of this debate, we think that unsafe jobs are going to be affected, and that's a fine thing. But more importantly, when you talk about unskilled jobs, and the problem is the fact that governments today have not chosen to invest in general education of those people who happen to remain unskilled despite access to education for other sections of society. Yeah. We think by virtue of governments simply being able to A, allow automation without heavy taxation, thereby allowing resources to be efficiently allocated, but B, allowing governments to now singularly focus on skilling those people and educating them in a way that they can more meaningfully contribute to the economy, is significantly better as an option.
Yeah, I have a few points to add here on that.
Just before that, can we agree that things like universal basic income, etc., are things that are not present? So unless my friend here would like to debate in the 2050s or 2060s, we should just disregard this idea because it's unnecessary for this debate. There is no universal basic income that exists in the world today.
Right.
After that, sir, what you were saying?
Right. So my point was in the same thing. And even if we were theoretically going to have a discussion on universal basic income, it has to be funded by ultimately the taxpayer. and if you're going to ask the person who is apparently working in a very unsafe job whether he wants to continue working in his unsafe job or lose his job, I'm sure he would pick the alternative of like not to continue working in his unsafe job. And from that perspective, I think a lot of points which Ankit brought up are either too far-fetched, or they're assuming a scenario where the government has enough funding to really carry out all these schemes such as universal basic income and other social safety.
So I'd like to respond to both Manav and Partha. I think the fact that UBI doesn't exist today is certainly true, except there are experimental models, but sure, let's assume that they don't exist at all. We think that the idea of when he himself put the characterization that we are losing 10,000, 20,000 jobs a day is itself also futuristic, right? To a large extent, that kind of extent of automation by virtue of the cost of automation itself does not exist in status quo, which means to a large extent this debate is going to be at least certainly to a certain point of time in the future, right? Second, how to fund, right? We agree that funding, even alternate to the UBI, do require certain funds. We have already talked about redirecting inefficient welfare spending to much more efficient UBI, but more importantly, and this comes back to the point that I brought forward before, right? By virtue of people no longer have to be forced into dead-end jobs that no longer contribute to them willingly, by virtue of that intellect being freed up for, say, entrepreneurial activities or abilities to do what you really want, those businesses being further taxed can
Sir,
create...
can you please debate this in reality? These are not people who are choosing to work in a mine because they really like it. These are people who work in a mine because they have no like collateral to give to a bank for a loan. These are people, and these are not governments that don't want people to be educated. These are governments that are trying to educate people, and from literacy rates like India had of like 25-30% in 1947 have gone to 65%.
And
You can't just blame the government for not educating people, therefore they're working in mines and therefore they're dying. Like people work in mines because they have no alternatives. And in your model, they will be fired and then they will depend either on the state dole or will die. Like that is literally what will happen to these people. They will die.
Yeah, but that's the argument, right? If you're making the argument that these people are working in these jobs forcibly and because of their poor financial condition, and then on the other hand, when you go and talk about when these people lose their job, maybe it's good for them that they go then automation.
But everyone works almost everyone works their job by force. Like I mean, if the sofa culture was allowed to exist, like nobody here would want to work, and everybody would want to sit at home and take a universal basic income. Like the fact that you're forced to work a job is sort of the way society works.
Right, and also another point is the people whom you're going to replace now in automation right now, that doesn't necessarily have to tie back to the idea of like the government losing incentive to educate the public currently, right? Because after all, the people who hold jobs right now were educated like 30 or 40, 50 years back maybe, and where obviously education was at a much lower rate than it is right now. So we can't comment. We had to look at the time gap here when we look at the policies we make.
Right. I think it's been a fruitful discussion. We can take about a minute to gather our thoughts, and we could start closing remarks with Rohan this time.
Right. So I think we've all agreed that the idea of automation reaching to such a large extent where it leads to mass unemployment is sort of futuristic and in the future. And I think we've agreed that if the people whose jobs are going to be lost, as stakeholders can be taken care of, maybe may it be through universal basic income or any other welfare scheme, then we see, I personally see no reason as to why we should not go ahead and favor automation.
Okay, I think this discussion is more about the transition towards a fully automated society with UBI, etc. In that paradigm, I think the change that this discussion has brought about in my initial stance is where I see two kinds of jobs. One which are very, very dangerous, cause deaths of humans all the time, and ones that are not. I think my stance on the latter stays the same, that heavy taxation is a good idea. On the former, however, I do recognize some benefits of robots taking over, even if that means firing of people. And maybe that kind of a stance is what I have right now.
So, considering that to a large extent we've all agreed to the fact that automation is to an extent inevitable, and that to this discussion is simply seeing the pace at which that automation is going to be adopted in society, I think that even though there are several unknown variables in future that we just cannot predict right now, the fact still remains that by virtue of automation existing in a less taxed environment simply ensures that the positives that come to the stakeholders of the discussion, which is to governments, businesses, and the employed people in general, is simply greater overall than the negatives that are associated to each individual stakeholder on the basis of health, education, and innovation in the economy in general. On all of these bases, I still believe that automation in general, of course, has certain harms associated with it, but when comparison to the benefits that come to society, will simply be a better option for society in future.
My position is largely unchanged in this discussion. I feel like the sort of impact this policy has on unskilled and uneducated people is not really being taken into account. And the fact that these people have no alternative, that they can't really go and take up another job, really indicates that these people need support from the government. And I see all the schemes put forward by Ankit and Kilani, such as universal basic income, can only be ultimately funded by heavier taxation on industries that are going to be increasingly profitable as we all agreed on, as automation moves on forward.
I'd like to thank all. Hi Partha, my name is Manav. I'm going to interview you for this post. How's your day been?
Oh, it's been a good day so far. I was waiting outside for a long time.
Yeah,
Thankfully, I'm finally here.
Our apologies for that. So you're good to go?
Yeah.
Right. So I know I have your CV, but can you just like tell me a little bit about yourself first?
Yeah. I'm from Bangalore. I'm currently a final year student in IIT Kharagpur. I study economics. Apart from that, I have a few hobbies as well. But my main focus and most of my time has been dedicated in my internship, which I've been doing the last summer.
Right. Okay, that's quite interesting. I just want to know, so what motivated you to apply for a job? So why do you want to be an analyst at our firm?
Yeah, so I was looking through the website of your firm, and I just had a look at the description. It was quite interesting to me. It was also quite relevant to like what I've been doing in my internship, and hence I thought it will be quite useful quite helpful if I really apply for a job at your firm.
Right. So clearly, like a lot of your like motivation as well as your learning seems to be out of this internship. I see that you worked with a wealth management firm in the summer, right? Can you tell me what has been your single biggest learning experience out of this internship?
In the internship, I got to interact with a lot of people, and I learned a lot about how a firm works. And it was quite interesting to hear all the like different perspectives on how like algorithmic trading works, which was my particular field of expertise there. And yes, so that the entire experience of like working at a firm and like learning about algorithmic trading was like my single biggest takeaway from this internship.
Right. So I hope you have a little bit of an idea about what we do here at the firm, right? So a lot of work at the firm involves certain amount of like calculus, certain amount of like mathematics, etc. Right? So we just want to check if potential recruitees are comfortable with like calculus and maths, right? So I'm just going to ask you to solve a small problem for me, if you may. So I want you to find the point of extremum, maxima or minima, of the following quadratic function. So could you write the function down? 2x square minus 3x plus 5.
Yeah, the answer is x is equal to 3 by 4.
Can you just walk me through the solution?
Yeah,
Can you also specify whether it's a point of maxima or minima?
This is a point of maxima. It was very simple. I just differentiated the equation once, and you will just straight away get x equal to 3 by 4.
Uh,
And
Partha, how do you then come to the conclusion that this is a point of maxima or minima?
yeah, so you take the double differential, and in this case it's x equal to it's 4.
Right. And when so after that, how do you then decide whether it's a point of global maxima or minima?
Yeah, so if it's like positive, that means it's a maxima.
All right. Be that is okay. Fine. I think there's a slight like issue here, which is something that you might want to check on later on. But let's move on to the next question. I think you might also know that a lot of our work involves on-ground field research, right? So we go to the field and we work with different business partners and we help them create businesses, right? So one of our business partners plans to launch a pen at IIT Kharagpur. Now he wants to create a market research survey, right? Do you know what like a survey is?
Yes.
Right. So he wants your help in deciding what product attributes he should be testing in that survey, right? Do you get my question? So can you help him? Give him like a bucket list probably of like attributes of a pen that he can put on that survey.
Yeah, so firstly the color of the pen is also quite important. So
Yeah.
if in deciding like, so that would be on the questionnaire. And next like generally what if it's gel or like ballpoint, and also maybe just like the ergonomics, like the grip of the pen, like what would be most preferable. So I think these are important attributes of a pen that they must test for, and maybe even color actually.
Right. So let's assume you have created the questionnaire. After you have created a successful questionnaire, and you know that your audience is IIT Kharagpur, how would you go around sampling your population? What would be your like idea about that?
Like I would just give the bunch of forms to like some guys, and I would tell them to like just go around campus and distribute them, like
Right. So you mean like in person?
yeah, like just hand them out. Yeah.
Right. Perfect. That sounds fine. I think I have all I need to know. Any questions on your mind? Any confusion? Any doubts, etc.?
Yeah, no, not really.
Right.
I'm just really excited to work at your firm.
Sure. It's been a nice time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, Vineet. My name is Manav.
Hi, Manav.
I am going to interview you today.
Awesome.
How's the day been? How are
It's
you?
been pretty hectic, but I'm really excited to be here.
Right. Should we go ahead?
Yeah, let's do it.
Right. So I can see you have your CV here.
Yeah.
I've had a look at it before.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me a little bit about yourself, though, first up?
Awesome. So, I'm Vineet Hase. I'm a final year undergraduate student at IIT Kharagpur. I'm working towards my master's degree in economics. And I divide my experiences into 3 broad categories. The first category is my internships in the financial sector in different financial firms, where I worked at firms which involve venture capitalist funding. I worked at firms which involve financial data analytics. I worked at firms which involved asset management. And all these experiences put together demonstrate a very, very stark interest in the financial sector. My second bucket of my college experiences lies in journalism, where I've been an editor of my campus newspaper, and I worked from being a reporter in second year to being an editor, showing scaling and assuming leadership responsibility. And my third area is basically extracurricular activities, where I've done a lot of stand-up comedy, and I've training to become a pastry chef, which I think is pretty interesting to a lot of people. Yeah.
That's quite a bucket of experience.
Yeah.
Who is your favorite stand-up comedian?
So my favorite stand-up comedian is and always will be Louis C.K.
Right.
I just love his blunt humor.
Right. That is quite cool. Yeah. So as good as these achievements are,
Yeah.
I just want to know what has motivated you to apply for this firm. Why are you here
Yeah.
interviewing for this?
So my motivation stems from the pre-placement talk that you guys had conducted, where I saw a lot of my alumni talking to me about how their experiences on college translated into their work life. And there are two specific things that I really like about this role. The first is mathematical rigor, right? We're all engineers, we're all people who come from a mathematical background, and I think that this is something I don't want to leave after college. I love doing my maths, I love analytical, I love critical thinking, and this is something I want to work with.
Yeah.
The second thing that my alumni had mentioned was that he had to work with people and clients on a daily basis. And this is something which I really like. I love pooling in ideas, I love working in a team, I love collaborating on different projects. So this would be my motivation for this.
Right, like clearly our alumni is quite on point in terms of what this job entails.
Yeah.
I also think, as you were mentioning, there's a lot of work that you've done in the financial sector during these 3 or 4 years, right? So probably the most interesting internship that I find here is your work with the venture capitalist firm.
Yeah.
I just want to know what has been your biggest learning experience via that internship.
So for a young person like me, talking to people at very, very high posts has always been something which I've been afraid to do, because you're always regarded as someone with a lack of experience. So my biggest takeaway from this internship was talking to people who had achieved a lot in their life, and talking to people and getting them to accept me as an equal, and getting them to accept my viewpoint in terms of how I wanted, how I was evaluating their startup, for example, in the venture capitalist firm, and how well I was able to articulate my ideas. So that would be the biggest takeaway from the summer.
So how has that impacted you?
So I begin to see myself as a little bit, a lot more confident in terms of what my line of questioning is in general to people. My ideas are a little bit better, are much better articulated, because I constantly feel a need for me to be very, very clear with my thought process, and I think that has definitely helped me.
That sounds quite nice. Okay, so as you were mentioning a while back, a lot of the work at our firm involves some amount of mathematical rigor or like application. Right? So I have just like a small question for you. I'm sure you've heard of like the concept of global maxima and minima. So I'm going to give you a function. I'd like you to give me the extrema and specify which of the two extrema it is.
Sure.
So the function is 2x squared.
2x squared
minus 3x.
minus 3x
plus 5.
plus 5. Okay. And I have to find the global extrema for this.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give me a couple of minutes to work this out?
Sure.
So I think I have the answer.
Sure.
Right. So let me give you the answer first, and then I'm going to walk you through how I did it. Right.
Perfect.
So I see that this function has a minima and a global minima at x is equal to 3 by 4. Let me walk you through the steps. Right. So we know that from calculus, a function attains its extrema value when its first derivative equals to 0. Right. Differentiating this, the first derivative of this function that you've given me is 4x minus 3. When we equate that to 0, we get x is equal to 3 by 4.
Sure.
Right. Now, we don't know we know that this x is equal to 3 by 4 is a extrema, which means it can be an inflection point, it can be a minima, or it can be a maxima, right? So, to verify our doubts about this, we need to take the second derivative, which comes out to be 4, right? And if the second derivative is positive, we know that the derivative that we calculated would be a minima. So, I would say that x is equal to 3 by 4 is a global minima, because this function doesn't change.
Sure. That sounds good. That sounds good. So another major aspect of life as an analyst at a firm involves a fair bit of ground research, field work, etc. Right? Because a lot of our clients are doing a lot of very basic research about products. So let's assume that one of our clients has come to you for help, and they want you to help them. They have a product, so they've made a new pen. Right? It's a normal, like average pen, and they want to like capture the IIT Kharagpur market. So the first question is like in designing their questionnaire or the survey questionnaire, they want to know what product attributes they must keep in mind. How do you help them on that?
Okay. Can I take a couple of minutes to just brainstorm? Okay, so I have an answer ready for you, and I'm going to draw upon a lot of my previous experiences to come to this answer, right? So let me put this, let me just start by giving you a laundry list of what I look at when I, want to buy a pen, and I think that as a student, I would be probably representative of the student population, right? So the first thing I would look at is the color of the ink, right?
Okay.
A lot of people have preferences of black over blue or red, right? The second thing I would look at is the longevity of the refill, right? A lot of people do not like to change pens often, and they would like their refill to last for a week or so, right? That'll be a really important question. The second would be the durability of the tip, right? A lot of pens have weak tips, which which lead to ink spilling and stuff like that, right? The fourth would be clustering or brand value attached, right?
Okay.
People tend to buy pens out of the an assumption that this brand produces the characteristics that I had talked about before, right? And you might have some sort of brand ambassador, like Reynolds had Sachin Tendulkar, right? So you have a lot of brand value attached to it. So this is these are sort of the areas I would look at.
That's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah.
So our client really likes your ideas.
Yeah.
They've come up with a very nice questionnaire. Like,
Yeah.
it's all ready.
Yeah.
Now they want to sample it in again the same area. Right?
Yeah.
My question is, how do you help them design like a plan for the sampling to happen?
Okay. Can I take another 30 seconds to design this? Yeah. Okay, I have a plan ready. So the first thing I think they should do is that they should host this survey on a Google form.
Okay.
Right? Because when this form is online, obviously tabulation of results is much easier.
Sure.
Right? Another very important thing to note is that a lot of IIT Kharagpur students are online. So social media is definitely the way of outreach.
Sure.
Right? A lot of people, each department has a lot of Facebook groups where you can post this survey on, and students of every department would post their given their preferences for their pens.
Yeah.
You can also very interestingly from the survey analyze whether pen preferences vary across departments, vary across maybe genders. All of these are questions you can ask. But yes, obviously approaching these students would be through social media, because that is where a lot of these students are most active.
Sure, that sounds nice. That sounds nice. I think I'm pretty much done at my end.
Yeah.
This point in time, we still have some time left. So you have any questions for me? Any confusions?
Yeah, so and going back to the pre-placement talk, I noticed that an alumni had said that there are a lot of opportunities in working in offices around the world. So can you tell me what is the probability of someone like me, an undergraduate like me, maybe in a year or so, going to work in an office like London?
Yes, so there are two kinds of programs that we have. One of them is when you stay stationed at your current office, but collaborate constantly with people from like the London office or the Boston office. A lot of our work currently is happening with not as much with the London office, but a lot of it happens with the American office. Simply because the industry is quite heavily integrated. So that won't involve you completely moving to Boston, but it would involve a lot of traveling to Boston, etc. And working with employees from Boston, etc. And vice versa. Secondly, beyond a couple of years, as and when suitable openings open up in other offices across the world, we do have a fairly fluid transfer policy within the firm. And I know a lot of friends of mine who took up those opportunities and decided to move out as well. So that's something that I don't think you being an undergraduate will ever be a barrier to that. Of course, it has to match. It has to be about a suitable profile opening up in another office.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, that's awesome to know. That's all from my side. Yeah,
it's been a good time.
All right,
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of contrast the two kind of interviews that you just saw. What I thought and what I was primarily looking for from the point, the mindset of an interviewer, were two things. I want an employee who doesn't just talk, who talks after thinking something through in his head, and therefore having some amount or some sense of structure in the way his or her thoughts are given out. I thought on that metric, it was quite clear to me as an interviewer that Vineet seemed a more suitable candidate. I thought at multiple points of time, right from the top, his answers sort of derived out of his personal experiences or out of some or the other form of genuine research. I thought in particular, his answer about his own life's experiences derived largely from experiences that were in his CV, but gave me a very good and a very quick summary of who he was. Secondly, his motivation to apply was largely explaining to me as to why he was a very good recruit and why he would like working at the firm. Again, all of these things seem to derive out of PPTs, out of talks with alumni, etc., and seemed fairly well thought out. In comparison, I thought Partha's answers were more on the go. I wasn't very sure if he'd done any previous research before he walked into this interview. I wasn't sure if he really wanted to work at our firm or was just saying it at that point of time. So as an interviewer, I'm way more likely to believe that Vineet as a candidate is more prepared and has been working for this interview for a larger amount of time. I thought on the question about the biggest learning experience, I thought again here, I think Partha demonstrated a general lack of understanding of the question itself, where I thought his answer to that question was largely about what he did at his internship, while Vineet's answer to an extent was about how that experience changed him, right? Or the value of what he learned out of it and how it changed him as a person. As far as the technical half of the interview was concerned, beyond this just error, the mathematical error that Partha made, I think what was more important for me than the final answer was to see the methodology. I think in both technical questions, what I was looking for was not just right answers, but just the guarantee that you will always get these questions right, or that the chance of you coming to the right questionnaire or the right sampling plan, etc., is as high as possible. From that mindset, I thought Vineet's strategy of walking me through his solution every point of time, telling me what mindset he's taking, even at the expense of taking a few seconds extra, was in my eyes a judicial move. Finally, I think the fact that you have questions ready for the interviewer again demonstrate that you really want to work at the firm, or at least that you've prepared a lot, that you've spoken to alumni and found out what is the kind of life that people have at that firm, etc. Necessarily what that does is that it makes you a low risk investment, and firms typically like people who are guaranteed to join, who are guaranteed to work, and who already know what life in that firm is going to look like, as compared to somebody who's not really found out about life in that company thus far. That was my comparative between the two candidates. Thank you.